Well, hello everyone. Happy Wednesday. Small crew right now. I know a couple of people have sent their regrets. It's summer and there's things going on, so totally understandable. And since people sent over some just thoughts that I can share throughout to share with you guys and see what you guys think on it. But to be respectful of everyone's time, we're going to kick this off right now. And I have the agenda up on the screen. Just kind of review what I'll be hitting today. But as always, we want to keep this loose, and I want to hear from you guys. So feel free to interrupt me at any point. So as I've mentioned before, what is a Zoom without a PowerPoint? Might be a little unnecessary, but it'll help me go over some of these housekeeping items that I mentioned. So just as usual, like welcome, be respectful of everyone's opinions. We may have different opinions, but we're all here for the right reasons. And we're in group F, so we've had our A through E groups already this week. I'd be happy to share some of the thoughts that came out of there and see what you guys think as well. On Friday, you guys should have received an email from me that included links to all the share drives, including your groups, but you also have the link to the other share drives. So if you want to check out what some of the other groups have shared, there's some links that I put in across the board. But there's also some ones that are more specific to those topics. So if you're interested in it, you can check out the other share drives for the other groups or share anything with them as well. The summary pages also were emailed out, a link to that. It's also on our website, so you can check out the summary pages along with the videos if you've missed a meeting or want to share it with someone else. And then this is kind of a new item. So I was planning on sending out a survey to kind of get feedback on how this group went. This is the first time we've done something like this. So I want to get your feedback on how we can improve this and make this better going forward. And the other thing is I've got a lot of feedback from you guys that we do want to get more feedback from the broader community, the priorities. And I also think it'll lend some more detail and some more community input for the white paper. So what I'm looking at is doing a survey that I'm going to ask you guys to take. And I'm going to ask you guys to push out to, your school communities, your parent communities, your neighbors, all of that. But I also want to ask you guys about the questions that I should include. I'm going to base the questions off of everything that we've talked about in this group and the other groups. But if you guys have ideas, I want you guys to give me some good input so we can make this survey as beneficial as possible to engage the community as much as possible and get more people involved and have their voices heard, even if they weren't able to participate in these groups. So just keep that in your mind as we talk today, but over the next 2 weeks, if you think of anything that you're like, we should poll the community on this, even if you don't have it fleshed out, I can help you flesh that out, what type of question we want to do. But I'm looking for input from you guys, and I'm hopefully sending that out in about 2 weeks. So if you have anything that pops to your mind in 2 weeks, email that over for me for the survey or anything to me. A quick update on the white paper. I really see two main purposes of the white paper. There's the immediate one that we put together and we give to the legislature about all of your thoughts and the community's thoughts for this upcoming legislative session. But I also think it's important that this conversation continues, right? So not everything is solved in one session. So I think that this white paper will continue to serve as a living document where we can continue to discuss different priorities, long-term priorities, but also things beyond the legislature. A lot of the groups have brought up things regarding community engagement, where it's not just legislative action, it's what we as a community can start working on right now that may partner again with legislative things in the future. So that's why I said think big, think small, think across the board, because this is not a conversation that ends at this legislative session. So that was my quick little PowerPoint. Again, I know it was a little unnecessary, but doesn't everyone love a PowerPoint? So we have our May summary, and then this is our June summary. And I actually just caught a little typo in here, so please excuse me. I wrote form instead of from. So apologies for the little typo. I'll make sure to correct that. But this is just, I'll have this up so it's a good reference point of things that we talked about last time. So what I'd really like to do is make sure that we've hit a lot of the priorities that you guys have talked about, hit some of the creative ideas that you guys have talked about, but then also kind of prioritize some of the things. And I think that across the board, teacher recruitment, teacher retention, teacher pay has been a top talking point, topic across all the groups. That's obviously a priority for you guys, but I want to make sure we identify other priorities, even though it's sometimes hard because it seems like everything is. So I am going to stop talking so much because I had a little bit of a cough today. And I want to turn it over to you guys. Again, I have some notes from people who have emailed stuff in, so I can throw that in. But since you guys are here, I want to hear from you, hear of any thoughts that you guys have had over the time, and then just keeping the other things in the mind, like the survey and the white paper and everything.
I can I can start, Catherine. I was just looking at this June meeting summary, and just one of the first things, and it's on there. It's the next bullet point down, but the teacher recruitment and retention. I agree totally. We should have teacher like reach out to try and get teacher recruitment and attention. I would like to draw a little bit more of a through line possibly to like the other members of the staff, right? And that's that second bullet point down on there. That's like retention issues with bus drivers, kitchen staff, school clerks, like everybody else that's inside of that school. Although I am a teacher and I want to see teachers obviously put forward, but teachers can't do their job without the rest of the school district that's there as well. So if there's any way we can just like change that white paper somehow to like not just say teacher recruitment and retention, but all school district staff teacher or recruitment and retention. I don't know. That's just from my perspective, just looking at that one right there. So
education retention.
yeah, that's something like that.
It sounds like the kids have to retain it, but and I also just saw there's an extra S right there too. So just ignore that like silly typo. But that was actually something that was brought up in the last group. And one of the things we were talking about, and I don't think we have good data on it, but how can we gather this data going forward? Is the cost of recruiting, training, and keeping these people on board, not just teachers, but like you said, across the spectrum. What is that cost? And does it make more sense to put more money up front for those salaries or benefits or whatever? Because the cost of continually replacing this person every couple of years, it actually costs more than if they had paid. So I think, yeah, that's something that I think we're looking at. Some other groups talked about as a way to gather more details on that.
And in relation to that, I think it's important to educate the legislators that all of that funding, it's not just for teachers, right? Like the funding that goes to school districts is all just one big pot, and how the school district distributes that is ultimately in the hands of the school district. But like I would be remiss if everybody just thinks that all the money that is given to school districts goes directly to teachers. I think that sets a bad precedent and a bad sort of like image. So I want to make sure that the legislator knows that like the money that is going there is not just for educators, but also for other staff as well. So
yeah, Kay, to your point about the cost of recruitment, I did some research on that for the session around one of Melissa Romano's like she had a bill around mentorship, and when it came to the appropriations committee, I did some research on that. Would it be helpful if I shared some of those resources with you?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, perfect.
And I think, yeah, taking that holistic look of what Dave said too, it's like, I don't, and I'd be interested to know, I don't know if how much information in there, how much it costs to recruit bus drivers. Because I saw people standing in Helena outside with a table and a bus behind them trying to recruit. So those people are being paid to sit out at that table out in public to recruit, right? So there's a lot of, you can see how those costs can add up. And again, some in the last group they brought up, it can cost just thousands of dollars to put that up on for ads for Indeed. And then the training costs and all that, it adds up very quick.
I also think that schools have gotten really creative about trying to think outside the box on how to recruit some of those positions, like bus drivers and stuff, sign-on bonuses, retention bonuses if they stay the whole year. But those sometimes can be easier to fund in some of those other funds other than the general fund. Like you can't do that kind of stuff for teachers or paras or some of your office staff that are paid out of the general fund because you have a limited amount. If you're budgeting for your transportation fund, you have the ability to permissive levy what you feel like your budget needs to be. And so there's a big difference there where people can do different things. And then when you look at kitchen staff, like that's a cash fund, and you're only making as much money as you bring in. And and a lot of schools don't even have self-sufficient food service funds. They're usually their general fund is having to supplement them, which is also a problem because that takes away from instruction as well, and any wages that you can put towards teachers and stuff. So I think as hard as it is to recruit bus drivers, I don't feel like pay's the problem. I think it's the requirements that it takes to become a bus driver. Not that I don't think that it's important for people to be well trained and things like that, but they've made it very difficult over the years for people to get their endorsement to become a bus driver. They now have to do an internship or have a learner's permit for a certain amount of time, and they have to do 15 hours of training every year instead of 10. Like they've put a lot of restrictions in there that I think have made it harder to get bus drivers as well. So I think it's that general fund is the big one that needs to be funded well in order to help out with all the other areas.
I'm sorry I was late, and I would agree with you, Carrie, that it's difficult to get, and we were contacted a year and a half ago with regards to using some of ESSER funds for bus driver increases in pay that were coming because they couldn't bring them in because of some of the extra training requirements. So I would agree with that. I will say that just on the whole area of recruiting of any staff, because you brought up several different staffing categories, working in the Silicon Valley during the high tech bloom, as it were, counties and a lot of public agencies couldn't hire in the same manner that a private Apple or IBM or Google or any of those could. And we resorted to very inexpensive partnerships with agencies, particularly the nonprofit agencies who also couldn't afford to compete with those high-end entities in recruiting for the same staff. So we combined with, say, a Boys and Girls Club to recruit jointly for childcare providers. The county had their own childcare center. And then did interviewing as a panel so that people could be selected in either realm. We combined positions. So we did recruitments that would enable us to hire a bus driver, for example, in addition to a teacher, in addition to a para, and while on the one, or a cook. And while on the one hand, you might say, well, those are very different skill sets. They are somewhat different skill sets, but they are also somewhat the same. And what we found, particularly in the area we were recruiting in, was that people wanted to come to a particular area. And so when we got members of the community to bring that recruitment committee or the recruiting candidates on a lunch, or let's tour what our community looks like. Here are some, and especially the Commerce Center, they were like wonderful. You got a very different level of interest. And even if the particular person who was the applicant applying didn't want the position, maybe the pay didn't compensate, they often became our recruiters later on. They would go, oh, you know, this area was so great. These are the things we wanted to look for. And by doing the crossover in jobs, it also elevated the sort of seemingly, you know, cooks are just cooks. Or we had a whole staff of painters. Painters are just painters. You know, they're not at the same level as an IT programmer. And we had to really educate people that, no, that's not the case. You know, somebody who does a good job of painting is just as valuable as someone who's doing the programming for an accounting system. So I think the pulling the funds out of general funds or any of those places, any of the current budgeting categories, can be difficult, but especially when you pull out of it, you're pulling away from other things, as opposed to being creative and saying, where else can we pull these funds from? Whether it's a grant or going to the legislature. I love the fact that these white papers are being produced, because I think the ideas that will be generated are great.
Yeah, Katie, Wendy's comments there gave me an idea for if we are putting in the white paper specific recommendations for research for the decennial study. I would be really curious to see exactly what buckets are getting pulled from the general fund that exists in their own bucket, if that makes sense. You know, so if we have a transportation bucket or a sped bucket or a whatnot, and that isn't fully funded, how much of those resources are getting pulled out of the general fund? I think that'd be a really interesting question for the decennial study to look at.
I think the Wendy brought up, paying for things, look for grants and stuff. And I think, unfortunately, we're seeing the remnants of that right now with ESSER. People paid for things with grants, and then now you're not able to sustain them long term. And so I think that's a tricky area too. Like, the legislatures had a history of providing one-time only money for different things, and it really doesn't help, because it gets you going, but it doesn't help you sustain anything. And so I'd really like, if they're going to do something, to make it so it goes on and not just a one-time try to fix it situation, unless it's the part where it's like they're going to help give one-time money to help make up for the inflation that we missed the last couple of years. I mean, that would be nice to help us catch up with our wages and things that we've been behind on. But if they're going to do funding like these one-time only monies, it's just killing schools overall. I mean, you get a great program going and then you have no way to sustain it.
So the sustainability of those one-time funding sources, and I know legislative has, opportunity grant or advanced opportunity grant and the transformational learning, and even some of the proficiency items that were done, or on the student side, dual enrollment coverage. While they're one time, they're really designed to be pilots. They aren't designed to be sustainable. ESSER definitely wasn't, but they have the capacity to significantly impact in the future. So a district who did some really amazing things with their ESSER funding can project that out 10 times fold by simply creating a voice that demonstrates that says, we did this pilot, these are the successes, these are the huge gains we received, and now public and legislators, we'd like it to be a permanent program. I don't think there are many legislators or community members who would look at that and go, no, we're not going to fund a successful program. They aren't going to fund a program that hasn't been demonstrated. And the problem is we've got a lot of things happening that don't necessarily get shared out. 21st Century is rarely shared out. Occasionally there's some videos and things that happen, but pilot programs are just that. They're designed to be pilots so that then you have the data and the evidence and frankly, the videos or media things to share that out, to get people to pay attention to what's been successful and then say, okay, and now we need to support it going forward. So I've seen a lot of programs be done that way. 21st Century was initially started as a pilot. Now it's pretty much a static funding stream. Among one, Title was kind of the same way. Actually, if you look at the history of Title.
Yeah, a lot of career and technical education programs, like federally and on other states, started off as pilot programs. And if we've seen career and technical education is always a hot topic and has been really heavily invested in, I think, across the country, more so than previous years, for sure.
Catherine, could I ask a follow-up question to Wendy on that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Wendy, I went off mute thinking, could you give us some examples of a pilot program that's funded and then after proving efficacy, it received more permanent funding on a regular basis? But I think you just suggested that the 21st Century program is that. I guess
Go ahead.
Could you help me understand, I guess, how that is funded and how that model might
Work
going forward to turn some of the more effective pilot programs into sustainably funded programs?
Yep. So One of the documents that we use in ESSER was developed years ago, 20 years ago, just in the realm that I'm in with writing grants all the time. And all it is a simple document to capture what it's using, sort of a scientific method of hypothesis. What is your problem? How did you come to the conclusion of solving, and what is your solving proposal? And then you basically implement, you document what you're doing. Well, the way that the data is captured then allows you to draw the picture afterwards and say, so what specifically were our outcomes, but more importantly, who was impacted by them? So if you do an after-school program that's a cooking program, you are helping students learn to cook, but you're also helping them to learn math if it's done intentionally. And you're also braiding together the community. So if your community becomes involved, they're your stakeholders. So you go back to them and you say, look at the success of this program. Look at how many meals we've served. We'd like to continue this to go forward. And that advocacy, as you promote that, people come out of the woodwork. I had 2 grantors come to a meal that we did as an after-school program who specifically said, you have to continue to apply for this grant. And I'm like, well, but I don't really think we want to keep it going. And they said, yes, you do. And increase the amount of money. Now, ESSER, from a federal standpoint, they rarely come to you and say, well, tell us all the good things you do directly. But our data reporting, our annual reporting that's done every single year on ESSER was exactly that. And so as you capture the data in ESSER, all the schools reported that. So did the non-schools who have done programming with it, capturing that data and promoting it out. This is what we did to allow the community. I mean, Montana's got great foundations. We've got the Washington Foundation, we've got Murdoch, we've got Steele Reeves. They're always looking for, tell me what you're doing great. Let us help you. And they have a lot of money. It's not a, 1,000 applicants to 10 awardees.
So Wendy, thank you for that. Generally speaking, then, are you kind of advocating that more of our funding comes from non-government, non-taxpayer sources going forward?
No, I'm not. And thank
Oh.
you for asking that question, Luke. I appreciate that. What I like about pilots and what I liked about ESSER, because although ESSER came from the federal government, the way they administered it was not really like the way they normally do things. First of all, they allowed amendments. That's not generally what you're able to do with that kind of a grant. And it was emergency funding, But what private institutions typically do is they give you a huge amount of flexibility. They go, give us your general concept. Now tell me how you're doing it. And that, I think, is a really good place for private funding to be. Then once you've proven that it's effective and efficient, then you go to legislators and your community and you go, look, we got a reading program that just increased our reading scores over the last 12 months by X amount. We want to keep this going. Would you like to pay for that bond specifically to do this? You're going to get a lot more yeses that way because there's a real cause and effect that's able to be demonstrated. I don't think, go ahead.
Well, I understand that model, and I think that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess specifically, are you suggesting then that, District A gets a private grant, runs a pilot program, their hypothesis is proven out, it seems effective. Are you advocating then that they would go to their local taxpayers and run like a general fund levy if they had the capacity to do that to fund it? Or are there examples where the legislature and the state government has actually, jumped onto something like that and funded it on a perpetual basis?
So the proficiency-based education that went across the state and was trying to get, and that came out as a transformational learning grant, that was kind of based on that model. It was, we've kind of tried proficiency-based, we think it's a good thing, we've seen some models. If we can get 10% of the districts to hop on board with it, maybe we can get momentum behind it. There's been some momentum behind that, but not a huge amount. And I don't know how much has been shared. I don't know how many people are aware of those kinds of programming efforts. But again, if you don't promote what the outcomes are, I think it's hard for whether it's the public or the legislators. And although the legislators are policymakers, they're also part of that public. I mean, I don't know that it's reasonable to expect a legislator to know everything that's going on in their community any more than it would be for you to expect that of the community members themselves. But I guess what I have seen, and this is my tainted background, I guess, from being in Montana, is that we're pretty committed people. We want education to succeed. We want our kids to succeed. But not everybody knows what that means. And sometimes schools or educational entities need to promote what they're doing so that the public and legislators are aware of what that means. What does success look like? It's not a piece of paper. And I think that's the hard piece, right? Because we're all in these different settings, small schools, large schools, the whole gamut in between. And we have incredible flexibility at our disposal. But we sometimes, we don't promote that out. And then the legislators, I think, sort of aren't so sure that they want to support anything, or we're going to support literacy, but what about math?
Another thing of note, if you're looking at grant or pilot programs, often within those bills at the last section directs, if it's OPI implementing it, to report certain things on how that program was implemented, the success, whatever, certain data points. So within, like, if it is a grant or pilot program bill, you can then be like, okay, this is the data I want to collect to show the efficacy of that program. And you build that into the bill. So you're getting, hopefully, the data back that you can, hopefully it's a successful program, or you can look back and say, actually, that didn't work out as well as we'd hoped, and we're going to try something completely different. That's allowed too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess one concern that I have in terms of any sort of reliance on grant funding, whether it be private or through OPI, is a lack of equity between different sizes of districts. I know that OPI does a lot of work to make sure that smaller districts are aware of their opportunities, but I think one thing that we've been hearing talking to parents and community members from smaller communities is just the administrative overwhelm from, a school business official or someone that's holding many, many hats in one of these smaller schools that just does not have the resources, time. I mean, I don't know, Carrie, if you've heard that from MASBO at all, but of just that it is not realistic for some of these smaller districts to even look at applying for some of those funding opportunities. So it ends up being kind of inherently inequitable, I guess.
Well, I would also say, like, some of the grants, I mean, when I was even working at a smaller school district that was a kindergarten through 8th school district, like, sometimes you'd apply for grants and you would get them and they'd be $5,000, which for a small school is a great amount of money. I mean, you can do a lot with it, but the amount of administrative paperwork and oversight that you have to do to do that grant is sometimes not worth it. I mean, when you already have a small staff. And then I mean, we're a AA school and ESSER has kicked our butt in administrative. Like, it's been very difficult. I mean, it came in and it had a lot of potential, and then strings just kept getting added to it. And it became very frustrating to the point where I've heard many business managers just be like, I just want to give it back. I don't even want it. It's too much of a hassle. It's too hard. Their cash requests are constantly getting returned. Their amendments aren't going through. Like, they were just feeling so defeated for so long. And I would say moving forward, grants are not something people are going to be like, yeah, let's sign up for a grant. Let government please give us more money for a grant. I just don't see it after what we all went through with ESSER. I think, ESSER pretty much pushed a lot of business managers out of the career also. I mean, they were like, I'm not going to do this. I'm done. So, grants are just hard for me, because if you're piloting something and it is successful and it's really good, if you're trying to get the legislature to pass something, they only meet every 2 years. What if it's an off year? Like, you really have to be intentional about your timing and all of that kind of stuff. And then what if you don't get funding? What if it doesn't happen? Then you may lose a great program that you started, and maybe you don't have capacity to ask for an operational mill levy or whatever either. And so then you still can't keep it going, even if you asked your community and they really did want to support you. So, I mean, there's just so many, I don't know. But like I said, grants are just kicking everybody's butt right now.
And I think, Carrie, you're 100% right on that. When I did my first submittable grant, I was going to kill him. I said, I cannot believe the demographics you are asking me to narrow down in this pile, and I've got 15 kids. This is like totally crazy. So I totally agree with you. However, you know, an ask could be to legislators, why are we all doing our own grants? That seems crazy. Why isn't there a centralized grant component for Montana schools that then helps run grants, administer them? Now there is the issue of competition. So then you have, well, you know, your school district may have hired a grant writer who can specifically advocate for you, or someone else doesn't have the funds to do that. But I think there are lots of ways that that could be. That in a university, they don't have each department run their own grant. Again, it would take all their research scientists out of the realm of doing research. They have a grant writing department. And, you know, there's a balance. In one organization I was with, we did that kind of funding. We would draft it in HR, actually where it was in HR. We would draft it, and then we'd send it to the departments, and then they would implement it. And then we would populate the forms for like data collection, and they would submit it.
That's what, yeah, Wendy, that's what I was gonna mention. I feel like having districts like utilize resources to get grants is just not really upholding the spirit of the Constitution of Montana that's supposed to provide education to students. Like, that says the state's supposed to provide that, not like districts shouldn't be expected or reliant on grants to fund their programs. That should be coming from the state. That's what's in the Constitution. So I would advocate that, like what you're saying, Wendy, is like, if that's an avenue that seems like the legislator is like apropos to sort of fund or to look at, then any kind of that, like those kind of avenues should be pursued by a state entity and not like by district entities. Districts could advocate for something, but I don't know, that feels like it's not really upholding the Constitution.
Yep, I think that advocacy, the districts advocating for what they need is, you know, part of what's happening here in this discussion. And as I said, I cannot agree with Carrie Moore with regards to some of the challenges of ESSER. And there's so many times I'm filling something out and I'm going, but it won't save. If I could just get it to save and send it to the district, and the district submits it, and the district sitting there going, can't you just save it for me? It's like, I can't, you know. So that shifting and partnership of education, as opposed to sort of this clear cut, this is only you and this is here, you know, maybe that's part of the sharing of the resources too, is being able to say, legislators, how about if you guys take on this role and let the districts do this role and let the funding accommodate that? I mean, I don't know.
I will say the issue that I would have with that is like obviously the equity issue, but then also if there's a centralized location that's going to it feels like a slippery slope to basically start to say like, okay, public education is going to be, you know, it could be partially funded by these privatized grants, even if it's through OPI or whatever else. Then all of a sudden people are going to say, well, let's follow that model more and more. And I worry about where that might put us when it comes to actually funding public education if we push too hard for a privatized grant system or anything else along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
Well, has anyone had any experience with the thing that they do every year in January? Oh gosh, the name's not coming to me right now, but it's where if you do an innovative program, you can ask donors to donate a certain amount of money. They have two different. No, it's through the state and they get tax credits for it. like educational tax credits to the
yes,
donors.
I'm forgetting the name too, but if they donate, they get a dollar for dollar return.
Yes, exactly. And they have a limit on that, on the amount of money that can be donated through that. And it's gone like that. Like it's like the first year it was gone. Like people were on their computers at their schools trying to get in and everything, and they couldn't. So it's like there's these opportunities, but then it also, to Dave's point, like creates these inequities along the way that they're not probably intentional, of course, but like the first year of the grant, like Big Sky School District took almost all of the money that you could up to the maximum. And so, and you know, I know that they're a public school and they're still in need just like the rest of us, but when the optics of it is like, Big Sky, really? They got all the money? Big surprise, right? So it's one of those things where it's like they have good intentions when they're going into some of this stuff, but the execution is just not there I don't know if it needs to be thought out more or more testing, or when they see a problem like that, they need to go back and readjust it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and it was like in 30 seconds or 20. It was right there.
Yeah, and I do think that there's a big difference between some of this grant funding or even those donations, tax credits, going towards extras for your school versus being reliant on them. Like there's been even a shift between going from 80 to 100% of funding through levying your local taxpayers being to cover some of the extras versus you have to have that to cover your basic needs, right? So I think that kind of speaks to the inadequacy of the funding formula in general right now, that we're relying on these things that we used to rely on for extras to cover basics.
I know, Dave, you brought this up last time and it ties into a couple things, but and what Jenny was just saying, but you said you wanted that the state should be in charge of the base level funding and then it's up to the district to go beyond that. So that was something you discussed, to take away some of the reliance and headaches and struggles with the levies. But also, you know, that money from the state still also coming from tax dollars or fee dollars, or it's coming from the people, businesses of the state too. So I just want to know if we wanted to dig in a little bit more on that. You guys really highlighted last time the reliance on the levies and the issues with that. So digging in a little bit more of how if you guys see other areas where you could advance to move away from levies. That was a very big topic last time.
Yeah, for me, what because you said, like I mentioned it last time, for me, what I was saying is, you know, they have this formula that's the state's going to provide 80% of your budget, and then you have to go out and ask your voters for 100%. And my argument is the state should just provide 100%. And if the district wants to go beyond that, then they can go out and ask their voters for it. They can say, here's this really cool program that we want to try as like a pilot program. Well, we need money to do that. Will you help us do that? But I think it's what Jenny was talking about just a second ago. That's like, we are like, that 100% budget is what schools need to operate. Like that's what we need to operate. And when those levies don't pass, then like programs get eliminated, teachers' jobs lose, the clerks lose their jobs, you know, like those types of things like make a school function. And when those levies don't pass, those things don't happen anymore. And like I think districts across the state are nimble enough that they can say like, okay, this levy didn't pass, so maybe this one program that we were funding is not going to be funded and everything else like that. But I don't think that it should come down to that. I think that the state has developed this formula that says, here's 100% of what a school needs to operate, but we're only going to give you 80 of it. And then you got to go out and ask your taxpayers for the other 20%. And I get the idea of local control, and I appreciate that, but that seems like a big gap, and it's creating a lot of problems inside of our districts. If you talk about inequity, anything you look at, like as soon as a school district doesn't pass their levy, then those schools are no longer equal. And it can be, you know, I'm looking at Cary here, and it can be 8 miles down the road, and it's a huge difference between like the community that's there and then the people that are asking for the money, and the way it's perceived creates a lot of problems inside of a community. And if the state could just say, okay, we have this formula. Here's what schools need to operate. Here's 100% of that funding. If districts want to ask for more money, then you can, but only up to like, I don't know, 20%. I don't know. I'm just throwing numbers out there now, but that would be my suggestion. And yeah, I know that's taxpayer dollars. I know that's levies. I know that like that obviously moves us away from levies, but it still is taxpayer dollars. But it seems like that fulfills the state constitution that says we provide a fully funded education system for our students. Like, we have a formula. This is what you need to fully fund it, but we're only going to give you 80%. That just seems like, the more I look into it, the more I'm like, that seems asinine. I don't know why. So, all right, that's my 2 cents.
I agree with you, Dave, and I think that if they would really focus on that constitutional thing of what we're having to provide, and not only what the Constitution says, but I think social, like the public expects certain things as well from us, and through that it also costs money. And so when you're expected for the school to provide different things, whether it's in law or it's just public perception overall that we should provide it, I think that the legislature needs to figure out what that number is, where that 100% is, because I would argue that the 100% that they have right now is still not 100% of what we need. Like, even if you got 100%, it's still not enough. And so if the 100% was the new base, like there's so many things that go into it, but I feel like there's just not enough money there to do what's expected of us and to be, innovative and creative and things like that too. They have programs out there that are trying to help us, but I would bet that there are schools that are just using those monies just to get by.
So I agree with both Terry and Dave. And this is kind of why I mentioned in the first group meeting that we had about the different areas of the state are different too, right? Like the cost of Bozeman and 100% that is figured for a cost of Bozeman looks a hell of a lot different on a per student basis, on a per school basis than it does in where I'm originally from in Sydney, Montana, right? Like the cost is just insanely different. And to not account for that, to me, just seems like, yeah, you're not following the Constitution again, because now you're hurting a place like Bozeman, where Bozeman would absolutely need to ask for more. If Sydney's getting adequate off of that formula, but there's nothing about the cost of living in an area, then Bozeman isn't. And so I'm really a big proponent of that needs to be somewhere in the funding formula, is looking at the cost of living in the area. And as far as providing 100%, and I think we do need to get away from the levies. It shifts the tax burden slightly, right? Like the property taxpayer is different than the income taxpayer, because it's just a totally different basis. And so it's looking at that. And I think right now we're just so heavy on the property tax side and just not looking at other ways that the state earns money to help fund.
I did hear. Oh, go ahead, Dave.
Nope, you guys go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask, and maybe somebody else knows better how this works, but what Keegan was just talking about, you could get away from property tax, you could allow a little bit of property tax relief if the property tax and the income tax all goes to the state and then it's distributed out to the schools at that 100% formula. Then I don't know if it's actually true or not, but if from what I'm understanding what Keegan just said, it would seem like that income tax and that property tax, if it's just out there at 100%, then you're not asking your voters to increase their property taxes per se. But I don't really know. I don't know how that side of it works. So my guess is Carrie probably has a much better idea of how that actually works than I do. But if that could be a relief for property tax, then that'd be good. And at the very least, it would make it, if we went to 100%, it would make it so that you don't have districts that are going out and saying, okay, we need to be able to actually operate our schools, so we need to ask for more taxes, then we need to ask for more money. No, we can go out and ask if we're okay, we have this we want to start offering baseball at the AA levels, but we need additional money to get that off the ground. So we can go out and ask money for that, like that, those kind of things. I don't know if that's how it works. Keegan, I don't know if you can explain that a little bit better or not.
Dave, I can speak to that, I think. At least broad brush. I mean, listen, there's definitely other ways of increasing revenue, right? I mean, you could look at our income tax system, and instead of having more or less a fixed rate, you could have a progressive system, where depending on your taxable income, your income tax rate goes up, and you could implement something like that and generate more revenue. On the property tax side, you could theoretically decrease the property taxes assessed on residential property owners, but increase the property taxes assessed on, corporate, business, industrial, property types. I mean, these are all options. Now, am I particularly optimistic that, that's going to happen in the next session? Not really, but it's important, I think, that, and I'm no expert in those areas, but yeah, like there are ways to generate additional revenue. But I almost think the more fundamental argument to make is to raise awareness and try and coalesce people around, we just need to invest more in public education. And I'll just throw this out here. The Montana School Board Association, I saw they recently said that on a per capita basis, Montana is spending $350 million less than the national average. North Dakota, Wyoming, and Alaska, all incredibly rural states, just like Montana, are outspending us on a per pupil basis, but totaling millions of dollars. So it's like, I think we have to make the argument, we have to agree that additional investment is needed, and then we figure out how do we actually generate those dollars. We can't go into it being naive enough to think that we want more investment, but taxes aren't going to go up. That is what that will require. But I think we need to make the case for that additional investment. And just reflecting on our guests, our 2.5, almost 3 meetings here, and thinking about how this is all coming together. I mean, I have to say, and anybody can speak up and disagree with me, I have to say what I have heard from all of you is that our basic school funding formula is no longer adequate. And it's just, it's simple as that. We can argue about where that additional funding comes from, or exactly how we might change the funding formula to incentivize this, disincentivize that, accommodate for this, like cost of living or neediness of students that are being served. Those are the details. But the bottom line is that I just feel like this group, and Catherine, you'll have the difficult job of probably pulling this all together, right? But like, I feel that there is consensus on this group that the funding formula is inadequate, and perhaps it once was, but it is not any longer. And I think that's the bottom line, and that's where the case needs to start if we're going to make some meaningful headway.
Well, I will be including all of your thoughts. Like I said, make sure to review when it comes out to make sure I am articulating everything as best I can. But I will be trying to put things in order on the white paper of the amount of times it's been brought up in all the groups. And you're right, that is something that's been brought up a lot. Just, we want increased funding for education, and then looking at the formula. One thing that stuck out to me that we've struggled with in a lot of the groups is Jenny wrote in the chat, like, the funding formula, there's a desire for simplicity. And we all agree with that, right? But at the same time, we've also talked about how the cost of living in area is different. The needs for a AA to a C school are very different. So a lot of people have brought up in the funding formula to be more like reflective of those differences. But that does make the funding formula technically more complicated, doesn't it? So it is an interesting thing, I think, for us to discuss, of that. If you want one thing, it comes along with possibly more complications.
Yeah, and it's going to have to stay complicated, right? Like, everyone always seems to say they want income tax to be simpler. And I'm an accountant, even though I don't do taxes. And like, I hear it all the time, and it's like, well, you know how it got complicated, right? Like, it didn't start this voluminous thing that was really difficult. It was people finding holes. It was like unique situations coming up and stuff like that that makes it complicated. And we have things that were brought up like special education funding, and how do you treat those? Each special education student is very different from the next. And we want to be able to fund all of them appropriately. And so it's like, well, okay, well, that we can't just set an amount very easily for this is a special education student. Is it, maybe it evens out over a larger district, but on a smaller district, it doesn't. And so like simplicity is nice. I don't see it as being my main goal or all that likely. I think it sounds great, but it's fairly unrealistic.
That's
Just-
kind of the reflections I've been hearing across the board. We're like, oh, we want it easier so we can educate the community on it and people can look at it and understand where their money's going, why it's being used in these ways. And then when we get down to the nitty gritty of actually what's behind, it's like, but we need to be able to respond to the individual needs of the different areas in Montana, because this is a very diverse state, more school districts per capita than any other state. So, you know, all of those things make it a lot more complicated.
Yeah, I don't.
Oh, go
disagree.
ahead, Jenny.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think, you know, I had to study like the history of the Montana school funding formula for one of my master's classes, and the visual I get is like the Weasley's house in Harry Potter, where it's just like been added onto. And the reasons that it's been added onto in these ways actually makes sense if you look at the historical context, right? But I think that there can be nuance and accounting for a diversity of different types of schools in the state, and that adding complexity. Where I get frustrated with the complexity is sometimes the solutions maybe that are brought by legislators that tweak certain parts of the formula rather than kind of looking at what Luke was talking about, looking at the whole picture and saying, okay, we need to kind of not start from scratch, but we need to make major changes rather than all of these tiny tweaks, which statutorily end up being reporting nightmares for school districts. So I think that we can kind of like those two things can be true at the same time, that we want more diversity and nuance for different sizes of schools and different needs. And also we can look at the structure of the basic formula and maybe simplify that to an extent.
Yeah, I agree with that, because I mean, when I make the income tax comparison on the federal level, like it'd be very difficult to start over or come even close to that. I think it's time to maybe not quite start over, but yeah, no, not the little tweaks of patches. It's major overhaul time.
Catherine, I don't know if you know that, I feel like I heard that the governor's taxpayer task force, I can't say that, is gonna announce kind of their recommendations on August 8th. And I'm just kind of curious to see what those end up being as far as how they recommend taxes change to help the residential property taxpayers. But then at the same time, I'm kind of like, I know that the governor's way against sales tax and things like that, but some of the states that have all three do really well, because you know, sales tax is a lot more progressive tax than property taxes and income taxes. So I don't know, I'm kind of interested to see how that task force ended up coming to a conclusion, and how they think they can help the bigger problem, you know, and help schools. I mean, I know there's other organizations out there that are publicly funded as well that are suffering because of this, but schools specifically rely so heavily on property taxes, whether it's part of our base funding, it's our levy, our over base levies, things like that if we can help our taxpayers, our residential taxpayers, not have to pay so much in property taxes, it would help schools and communities, because I think it says in here, the thing that's right there, like the community, and school relationships are suffering because they're becoming so divisive over these levies. It just ends up being like, if you have to ask for money, you're not managing it correctly, obviously. And so, we need a mind shift on that from like, okay, this is how the system is set up. We have to ask, this is your portion of local control. It does not in any way insinuate that the district is not using the money that they get from the state appropriately. So I'm really interested to see what comes out with that task force and how they plan on helping these situations.
Here's the task force, and also the revenue committee has been having discussions about property tax relief as well, which could obviously have implications for education funding. Because if you put caps on the limits of property tax raises, then where do you find that if you need it other ways? But they also talked about finding ways to address that by possibly taxing out-of-state residents, properties, second homes, short-term rentals, those things at different levels too. So those were being bandied about by the revenue committee. I think there is a lot of discussion around that of how we relieve property taxes, but also I think ensure that schools receive funding. So we're running out of time here, and I know it was very quick. And before I ask for any last comments or anything you guys want to comment, you do not have to say your parting words to me right now. Please stay in contact with me. I'll be building the white paper and getting your guys' feedback in August, but throughout that time, send me stuff, anything you want. I know Jenny said she's going to send me some stats. That's awesome. I have someone from another group sending me some stats about after school programs as well to help build that in. So if you guys have any, there's almost too much research out there. Well, that's not true. There's a lot of research out there. So if you guys find something that you think is particularly would be interesting to Montana legislators for me to highlight in the white paper, please send that to me. Think about the survey and how we can get more feedback from the community, and help me think of some really good questions of what you guys would be interested in seeing. And I'm hoping that through all of your guys' help and the 170 members who signed up for the Budget and Education Working Group, we can get that survey out and hopefully get a really decent return on people who fill it out. And I think that also helps bolster all of your guys' arguments in the white paper as well. But that's kind of what we're looking for the rest of kind of the summer. But I just also want to thank you guys for just being a part of this, being patient with me as we kind of do this for the first time, and hopefully give me some constructive feedback of how we can make this better going forward. But I just want to thank you guys. I know you're taking time out of your personal lives and are so committed to this. So thank you so much. I really appreciate that. But any other questions, any other parting comments at this time?
I guess, is there going to be a meeting of the full group again, or are we good to go with that?
When I send out the review, I'm going to see people's feedback, and I was thinking about setting up a whole review to kind of go over that. I was going to send out the white paper and draft form a little bit, get some feedback, and possibly actually was thinking about that, but I hadn't announced it yet because I didn't pick a date. But I was possibly looking at doing something that near the end of August, so we can have everything kind of wrapped up and pretty for September. Because there's some education committee hearings in the 16th, 17th, 18th of September, I believe. So I want to make sure that we get that to them before those hearings. So
thank you so much for running this.
Thanks everyone too. So
Yeah.
Yes, everyone's great. Thank you. Okay. Well, enjoy your night. Stay cool out there. And thank you again.
Thank you.